and since he was, I wanted him, as I told him, he's the pastor of this church. I am an assistant pastor, yes. I am here, and I have a different view of an assistant pastor to almost anyone in the world. Because I truly view an assistant pastor as an assistant to the pastor. So my job is to do what the pastor needs done, within capabilities. He's never going to ask me to come and work on the boiler or do anything with that or anything like that. But, to fill in and stuff like that. And I can tell you it's going to be difficult for him, same as it was a few weeks ago, to sit in the service and not be the one up preaching. When you're called to do that, it's wonderful in ways because you don't get to sit and listen to a message that often. But it's also one of those things that's what you're called to do. And I know every Sunday when I listen to him preach, I love preaching, I love listening. Don't get me wrong. But there's always that, I wish I could preach more and stuff, in your mind. Because that is something that I've been called to do, that he's been called to do. And so I just wanted to let you know that I wanted to thank him for giving me the opportunity. I know it is a difficult thing for a pastor to allow someone else to get up and speak at their church. And allowing me to do that. I want to thank him for that. So today's message is going to come from Hebrews chapter 12. I'm not going to read so much from the verse like we normally do because the message is coming from Hebrews chapter 12. As in all of it. And I'm not going to sit and read 30 verses to you guys. You guys are able to look at that. But there's a reason. And something kind of hit me a few weeks ago. And that is, I realized, outside of when you're doing a devotional that it assigns reading, but if I go to the Bible to read the Bible, I tend to read the same sections over and over. And in Hebrews chapter 12, if you ask me about Hebrews chapter 12, I can tell you about those first 3 verses. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And I'm not going to keep going. The point is, I can tell you, I know that verse. Those verses are very important and core to my life. I truly do not know if I would be an associate pastor in the Church of the Nazarene if it wasn't for those verses. And I know you're saying, that's not a verse that... No. But in 1989, that was the quadrennial message to the NYI of the Church of the Nazarene. The song Dare to Run was the official theme song for that 4 years. I still remember that song. And I remember that message, that we must run the race that Christ has laid out before us. We must run the race that God has laid out before us. And that is why I'm here today. I truly 100% believe that if I did not hear that message that summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school, because that's when I truly started getting into church. Before that, I was an occasional attender. I was a typical bus kid. The bus would show up. If I wanted to go, I'd get on the bus. If I didn't, I'd say, Tony, the bus driver, I'm not going today. Okay, David. Every Sunday, he was still at my door, though. Even if I wasn't coming, he still came to check on me. But I'm letting you know that being invited to take a bike trip here to Indianapolis for this, and joining the group for there, and quizzing, and Hebrews, prior to this, was the first book I ever did in Bible quizzing. So Hebrews always has had kind of a soft spot in my heart because of that. And I can tell you, you guys have heard me do a message on Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 before. And I always get stuck on the word therefore. And I say, when you look at the word therefore, you need to stop and ask what it's there for. And I'm not doing that today because I made the mistake of never going beyond that. Do you realize there's more than 3 verses in Hebrews chapter 12? Now, I'm not going to lie and say I didn't. I knew that. And I've read them, obviously, as a Bible quizzer. But it's one of those things that we tend to get stuck on. These are the ones that speak to us, and we go back to them, and we sometimes forget that there's more to God's Word. There's a reason that there's read the Bible in a year challenges and things like that, and it's because you need to understand there's more to the Bible than these select scriptures. Because when you get stuck on a select scripture here and there, You could do the same thing that my grandmother used to love doing. Whenever she would have a Jehovah's Witness come in, she would sit there and she would say, after listening to them, she'd say, yeah, but you know what? Here in the book of Acts, it said that Judas went out and hung himself. And you flip over here, it says, go and do thou likewise. So the point of the matter is, if you go flipping around all the time, then you're going to have the issue of you're not getting everything that God wants for you. And sometimes what God has to say to you isn't what you want to hear. And that's when I was reading, because like I said, I got challenged on that myself as I was reading something. And so I started doing that, and I took some of my favorite verses. So Hebrews 12, 1-3 popped to my mind. So I decided to read the entire book of Hebrews. And I didn't necessarily like, or chapter 12, and I didn't necessarily like what it said at first until I stopped to think about it. So we're going to look not at Hebrews 1-3, but we're really going to be looking at 4 and beyond. Because we start in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 4. And I am going to read some, but we're going to go ahead. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And you have forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as children. My child, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. Because the Lord disciplines those he loves and punishes everyone he accepts as a child. Then it goes on, and I'm not going to read there, so all of it, but so we all have had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? I had an interesting father. He was actually my stepfather. He moved into my life when I was around 6. He was in my life until he passed away in my mid-20s. So I was 24 when he passed away. So he was my dad. That I grew up, I knew who my biological father was. I'm not saying that. But this guy was my dad. He was the one that raised me. He was the one that taught me. He was the one that I ignored and regretfully can't do half the things I should be able to do because he was able to do them and tried to show me and I wouldn't learn the lessons. For example, he could work on a car without any issues. Me, I can maybe change the tire and maybe change the oil. Beyond that, we need to take it in. I mean, simple things, windshield washer fluid, stuff like that. But outside of that, no. But he tried to teach me. There were many summer days we were out there and he was working on the car and he was showing me and he was, working it and what to do. And I just didn't care. And the one thing I will say is he did not discipline me much. He thought that he was not my father. He realized that. And so because of that, he would usually allow my mom to be the disciplinarian. Because I was her child. But I can think of 2 times there was exceptions to that rule. The first time was when we lived with my aunt for a while. We moved in with my aunt at the end of my first grade year to the beginning of my second grade year. So not quite a year that we lived there. And my aunt had a backyard with 2 lovely trees to climb. And gentlemen, maybe even some ladies, who at that age didn't want to go climb trees? It was fun. Well, my dad looked at me and said, look, I know you like climbing these 2 trees, but this tree over there, do not climb. If you want to climb this one. And the odd thing is, the one he wanted me to climb was the bigger one. It wasn't because it was littler. But I found out later it was because this tree, to get into it, the tree came up and then did a Y, and I would step into the Y. But it was a tight foot, and he's like, your foot's going to get stuck. So one day, I decided to climb that tree, and guess what happened? My foot got stuck. I kind of fell backwards, was hanging by my foot from the tree. Did I yell for help?
No.
You tell me, guys, do you yell for help? No, what do? You swing yourself until your foot comes loose, right? I was not yelling for help, because what's going to happen if I yell for help? I'm going to get in trouble. So I sit there, and I finally work my foot loose. I was hanging upside down at least an hour, it felt like. It's probably 30 seconds to a minute, but it felt like an hour. And I got out of that tree, and I was so proud, and I went to stand up, and I heard, don't you dare move. And I looked over, and there was my dad leaning against the back of the garage, just leaning against it, watching me. He didn't make a sound while I was hanging there. Don't you dare move. And he walked over, and he got down on his knees so gently. My dad's not known for gentle, but he was so gentle, and he looked at my bare foot, because of course you climb trees barefooted at that time, right? My bare foot, and yeah, there was a few scrapes, but he, felt it to make sure nothing was broken. Then he's like, get up, I need to see you walk a lap around the tree. I want to make sure you can walk. So loving. So kind. He's like, you can walk, everything's okay? Yeah, I'm fine. He's like, good. Takes my hand, snaps off a branch, come with me, and takes me behind the chicken coop. What happened there, we don't need to discuss. You guys can put in your mind. It is one of only 2 times that I can remember him disciplining. The second time I remember him disciplining me was when he first took me out and taught me how to shoot a gun. It was a .22 single-shot rifle. So after you shoot the weapon, it is unloaded until you pop that shell out, put a new shell in, and pump it, right? So I shot, and I finally hit the can. And I turned, Dad, I hit the can. Don't you ever point a gun at me again. I said, but it's unloaded. There is no such thing as an unloaded weapon. Every weapon is loaded. Does not matter if you personally emptied it. That's a loaded weapon because you never want to take that chance and hurt someone. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, So then I popped the shell out and hit the can. Dad, I did it again. Did I point it at the ground? No. My dad then took 2 steps forward and punted me like I was a football. Right on the butt. I went flying 5 feet. Gun went one way, I went that. But I can tell you right now, I never once again forgot to put the barrel of the gun towards the ground when I turned around. The point of the matter is, I can still to this day, and think about it, I'm talking I was 7 or 8, over 40 years ago, and I can still remember those 2 lessons my dad gave me. Why? Because they came with loving discipline. I looked up the word discipline because, we kind of sometimes question it. So I Googled the word discipline just to get what would they do. And I actually like the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior using punishment to correct disobedience. I like that, discipline, because it allows me when I was going through the Army and was in basic training, they had discipline. My dad, on those 2 occasions, showed me discipline. But I can tell you that discipline only works in a relationship. You must have respect for the one giving out discipline in order for it to actually correct behavior. And what I mean by that, and we've seen it a million times in school, we'll use as an example, where you have that kid that just, there's no respect for that teacher, and it doesn't matter what that teacher says, that student's never going to do it. Why? Because there is no relationship. If a teacher wants to truly change a student's life, they have to have a relationship with that student. I can tell you right now, to me, to this day, when I watch my wife teach, I know that is a gift from God. I know that that is the gift my wife received from God. I can see it in the way that she is. She will have students that have never even been in her class call her by name and come up and give her a hug because she still showed in those years that she was working, even with the other students, they still showed and they still saw that she cares. And it's fascinating to see those teachers that don't build those relationships and get upset because there's a student that they just cannot reach and won't listen to them. And my wife walks by and says, Johnny, you need to stop that. Okay, Mrs. Reed, and he'll immediately stop it. That the teacher's been yelling at him for 2 hours. Why? Because my wife took the time to build a relationship first. The other thing to remember is that discipline is based upon what the person believes is right and wrong. And you can be disciplined for something incorrectly. Have any of you ever had that happen? Sometime in your life where you have received discipline for something you did not do. I can tell you when I was in basic training, they went out and did bayonet training one day. For those of you that don't know what that means is they took our M16s and attached a bayonet, basically a long knife or pointy thing at the end, and had us out there bayonet training. I can't tell you anything beyond that because the day that we did bayonet training, I was one of 10 people selected to go and clean out a barracks because they had a new class coming in. So they always have one of the existing classes go in and at least clean it up, dust it out some and stuff like that to have it ready for the next class. Well, that night, about 1 o'clock in the morning, after we've been in bed about an hour or so, every one of us is woken up. They're missing a bayonet. So they take the entire platoon out, and we are low crawling to look for the bayonet. For those that don't know what that means, we are down on our stomachs using our elbows and doing this, dragging our bodies behind us. You can use your knees somewhat, but you're not allowed to lift yourself up. You have to kind of do them sideways because you can't stick your butt. Low crawling the field. And one of the people next to me, I can still remember to this day, Private Reed, why are you not complaining? You weren't even out here. And my response was, if this platoon lost something, I lost something. Thankfully, because I did not know this, I hear a voice right behind me. Good answer, Private Reed. The drill instructor was standing right there and heard that entire conversation. So if I had started complaining, you can guess what would have happened to me. Thankfully, I made that right choice. And so, but why did I do that? Again, discipline. I had respect for my drill instructors. I really did. I respected what they did. I understood it. I'm one of those strange people that went through basic training with a smile on my face, laughing half the time, because I thought what they did was so funny, because I was able, because I came in knowing kind of what to expect, was able to kind of separate myself and see exactly why they were doing what they were doing. In which case, it makes it so much easier to do it if you can understand the why. Because you're not allowed to ask in the basic training or you're going to get in more trouble. And there was multiple times where I was punished for something I didn't necessarily do. I got punished because I got my new glasses in, my military glasses, and the drill instructor didn't realize it for a week. And so I got punished because I hadn't let him yell at me for a week for having the wrong glasses in. So he yelled at me because I finally got the glasses that he had been yelling at me that I didn't have. But again, I was like, yes, drill sergeant. I went and did 20 push-ups or whatever we did. We went on with our day. But the point is, the discipline goes to that relationship. I saw the smile on his face as he did it. Not really, but you can kind of see it in their eyes if you watch. They're not nearly as mean as they like to. Though there's some, but stuff like that. But you can be disciplined. But I want to point out one thing. When it goes into this discipline, it discusses God. How much more shall we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in His holiness. God doesn't make the mistake. If God is disciplining you, then there is a reason that you are being disciplined. We might not always understand it at first, but there is a reason. And what we need to understand is it goes back to that relationship we have with God. And God, when He disciplines us, is trying to make sure we understand to never do or not do things that is going to cause any type of break in that relationship. There is no breaking up with God or anything like that in His mind. He doesn't want us anyone to ever walk away. He will discipline us, but when He does so, there is a reason. And we need to, when we face discipline, not complain about it, but spend time with God to find out why. That is what He wants. He wants you to take time with Him so that you can understand what the discipline is for, so that you can correct it. Is that not the purpose of discipline? It's training people to obey rules or a code of behavior. It's God training us in the ways to become Christ-like, to become holy, to become God-like, to follow in His footsteps. Now it goes on, there's more. Going into verses 14 through 17, make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. So a couple weeks ago, I did pray somewhat on holiness. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time there, but I want to point out two things here. Peace and holiness. Now, when I'm talking peace, am I talking about that means that there's not going to be anything rough or any type of discipline, or you're not going to face any turmoils or strife? No. There's a difference between that, when we live in a sinful world, and peace, which is God in us. It is the peace of God dwelling in you. I'm not going to say names because I don't want to embarrass anyone. But there is a certain person here that comes to this church that I absolutely love talking to every single Sunday when I can. This person always has a smile on their face, no matter what they're facing. No matter what, everything is always positive. But it's not the blowing smoke type of positive that you sometimes get from your boss or something like that. This tree, you can truly see he just has that peace within their life. And because of that, you can see that, and it makes me want to have that, and it makes me like spending time with them, because I like just listening to them talk to try and get ideas of how they deal with situations that just irk me. Because I'm hoping to grow more like them. Not because I want to be like them, but because I see Christ in what they do. And I want to imitate them to help draw me closer to Christ. People that love saying that, you do not have to go to church to be saved. You're right. But I can tell you right now, without church and the people in church, how are you ever really going to grow closer to Christ? How are you going to learn if you don't have someone to teach you? And yes, you can sit there and you can read the Bible and stuff, but how many of us are biblical scholars enough that truly can understand all that the Bible is saying? I will say right now, I've taken theology classes, I've done Bible studies, like in college on books of the Bible and stuff, and I still don't feel like I know the Bible well enough that I fully 100% understand it. There are still things that I read and I'm like, why? Why is that there? What's that mean? And we have to stop. I love saying this, but as a child, 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I grew up wondering why I didn't want my shepherd. It wasn't until I got older and took the time to talk to someone that said, no, it doesn't say you don't want your shepherd. It says you don't want, that God's going to provide. I never could get, once you read the rest of the chapter, it makes sense, but I really never got past that verse because I would start questioning, why don't I want my Savior? It took someone taking the time to talk to me. So at 50 years old, I might still be reading that, as the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, if I did not have a fellowship of believers that I helped and spent time with. You need to have God's peace in your life. That does not mean that you're not going to have trials. That does not mean there's not going to be turmoil in your life. That does not mean, unlike what a lot of teachers now teaching nowadays, that everyone that is a good Christian is going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. That is not biblical. I'm sorry, but nowhere does it say in the Bible that. There is a famous theologian. His last name is Moltmann. I had to write a paper on a book by Jürgen Moltmann. And in that book, as you read through, he discusses things such as the woman that was healed by just touching the hem of Jesus' cloak. And his point was Jesus was so holy and so in touch with God that just being in his presence drove away sin. Well, to me, his stress on that went to the point that he made it seem to me that he's saying that she was sick because she was sinful. And it was being right with God that saved her. And I'm like, no. Because I know very many godly men, godly women that face disease. Disease is a result of sin, but it's a result of sin in this world. It is a result of the sinful condition that we find ourselves in when we are born. And so I had to write a 4-page paper on this. And so I went to my theology professor, Dr. Keene, Dr. Craig Keene. Loved that man. And I said, Dr. Keene, here's my 4-page paper you wanted. And when it seems disjointed, here's the 12-page paper I actually wrote. 6 of those 12 pages was just fighting that one point. It so irked me. I could not get past that point in that book. I got so focused on it. I spent 6 out of 12 pages just on that one point, when if I had taken a step back and actually read, which I did read the entire book, but actually read the entire book, and didn't put everything on a lens that this is what he's saying, I would have figured out that he had no way, shape, or form was saying that, but I got stuck on that one little example, and it ruined the entire book for me. Dr. King still gave me a good grade on the paper, because it was a good paper, I'll admit it. But he told me, I need you to go back and read that book again. He said, and forget that section, read the rest. And doing that, I ended up becoming a fan of Moltmann. I really liked the book once I got past that one point, and I actually read the rest of what he said about it, where it didn't. But to me, it just was, he was blaming sickness on sin, and I was like, no, because there's good people that get sick. And I didn't read on that the sickness, and he even said, came from the condition, not from the actions. You need to make sure there's no bitter root within you. It says that in these verses. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You have that. But it's that bitter root that hurts our Christian churches. Because you always have that 1 or 2 people that get stuck on something that they don't like. And I'm not talking biblically they don't like. I'm talking, you have people that get stuck on, well, the music's too loud. You have people that are stuck on, and my wife taught at a school that literally split because they allowed a female to get up and help lead singing. They still had a male leading it, but they had a female on stage with them. And because there was a female on stage, half the church left that church. Because females should not be teaching men. It was a Church of Christ in Indianapolis. But what's the point behind that? Bitter root. If you allow anything bitter, anything ungodly into your life, it can affect the entire church. When I went to Greenfield, we had this couple here. They were an awesome couple. They taught the 3rd and 4th grade Sunday school class. Everyone loved this people. Well, they were getting married. They were engaged to get married. But they finished college. They still had like 6 months until their wedding day. And financially, they couldn't live with their parents. And financially, they couldn't each afford an apartment. So they decided to get an apartment together. The church basically kicked them out. Stopped letting them be Sunday school teachers and everything because they were living together and not being married. Now, was that right or wrong? I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs. But what I am saying is anything can be taken as a bitter root if it's not biblical. So you need to make sure that you're not the one bringing anything that's ungodly into church. And it can be simple. I had a person that was upset and wrote me a letter. It was a Sunday that I was preaching because the person leading music had green toenail polish. So we were allowing the bar to come into the church because only women that are singing at the bars and stuff would wear toenail polish like that. Now, I will admit this was a lady that was in her 80s or 90s, so, you know.
You gotta be kidding me.
But the point is, anything can become a bitter root if it's not godly. And then finally, on this point, the one thing I want to point out, and it goes into in this where it talks about Esau who sold his birthright. And even though he begged for it with tears, he could not get his birthright back. I want to point out that your actions have consequences, even if you're forgiven for the actions. There are still going to be consequences. Adam and Eve, based upon what we see in the Bible, looks like they were forgiven for eating of the forbidden fruit. But we're still facing the consequences today because of one act that they did. How many times have you heard that? Actions have consequences. But we sometimes want to, in the Christian church, sit there and use the excuse that, well, I'm forgiven, so it doesn't matter anymore. No, there's still consequences of your action. You're forgiven. You will get to go to heaven. You can be part of the fellowship of believers. But you need to understand there's still going to be consequences of your actions. There's still going to be problems and stuff that may arise from what you did. And we've all seen that. And if you're honest with yourself, you know that that is correct. And finally, Hebrews chapter 12 deals with the story of two different mountains. First mountain we all know of, Mount Sinai. It is where Moses went up and received the Ten Commandments. And if you stop and read that story, and we try to gloss over it nowadays and make it so phenomenal, but the Israelites were scared spitless at that mountain. They were terrified of what was going on. It was not a time of hallelujahs and stuff. They were scared out of their skin. Stop and read that. It is darkness. It is gloom. Not the delivering of the Ten Commandments. I'm not saying that. But I'm talking about what was going on around there. While Moses was gone, they didn't know what was going on. There was clouds and thunder, and it was just scary. The Hebrews 12 compares that to another mountain, Mount Zion. It says, you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Amen. Think about what we're doing, what the purpose of this is. Why are we in church? We are in church to have a relationship with Jesus Christ and to one day be able to basically move in with Him. We're all looking forward. We sang it in the song, to the mansion sublime. Whenever I think of those mansions, it always makes me think of a little story. Okay, I'm doing okay. A real quick story about a couple. And I think I've said this before, but it's still a funny story. But you have a couple that are in their mid-80s. And they were in perfect health because about 10 years before, the wife had a scare, and because of that, everything became healthy. Bran muffins instead of anything good for breakfast. And we all know what we're talking about. But both of them were in a car when someone ran a red light, hit their car, and killed them. Healthy or not, they're both appear in heaven together. And there's St. Peter, and he says, I'm going to take you on a tour of heaven. Now remember, this couple is in their mid-80s. So they take them to the mansion that Jesus has prepared for them. And Peter shows them all these wonderful things, all these amenities. And the first thing the guy asks is, what's this going to cost me? Nothing, sir. This is a gift from God. This is the house, the mansion that Jesus built for you. Really? Yeah, really. And then they went out the back door. And there in front of them was a golf course. And the guy looks and says, wow. And Peter says, no, you don't know. This golf course once a week changes and matches every golf course ever created on earth, plus some that God himself designed. The guy's like, oh, wow. What are the green fees? God, sir, this is heaven. Nothing costs anything. This is a gift from God. This is your reward for the service that you had while you were on earth. Really? Yeah. So after that, and of course the wife could care less about that part, but they go to the clubhouse. And as they open the door, just in their face, they can smell it. And before them is a lavish buffet. Any food you could ever imagine was right there. They had lamb and potato, whatever you can imagine. Food right there. And of course, the old man stops and looks, here's where it is. What's it cost to eat the buffet? Now, Peter is getting frustrated by this point. Sir, I need you to understand. Everything in heaven is a reward. It's what you receive for living your life for Christ. So there's no cost, nothing. It's God's gift to you. You can't purchase a gift, really. Then he looks at his wife and, so where's the bran muffins? Oh, no, sir. Best thing about heaven, you can eat whatever you want. You don't have to worry about sickness. You don't have to worry about getting overweight. Enjoy. It's a gift from God. You're kidding me. No. I can eat whatever I want? Yeah. Stops and looks at Peter, and he looks at his wife. He looks at Peter, and he goes, you and your stupid bran muffins, I could have been here 10 years ago. That's not exactly what heaven's like. I know that. I'm not trying to say that. But that's the joy we're going to have when we're in heaven. Whenever we lose someone here on earth, we regret it. We're more remorseful. We mourn their loss. But I can guarantee you, every person, once they've stepped into heaven, they're like, why couldn't I have been here 10 years ago? Doesn't matter their age. Doesn't matter what they feel like they have left on earth. Heaven is such a reward that there is no sadness. And it's not because immediately you forget everyone. It's because it's your reward. So as the group comes up, I just want everyone to stop and think. Think of your relationship. Think of the discipline that you faced as you have lived your life. Think of the times that God has disciplined you. Think of the times that you've felt that peace that can only come from doing what you know God wanted you to do. Because there is no feeling like that. Think of the holiness that can fill your life because of that peace and because of that relationship. Not because of what you've done, but because you've accepted that relationship with Christ. Think of that mountain, not the scary mountain that we see in the Old Testament, which was a phenomenal thing and gave us great things, but of the heavenly Mount Zion that we are looking forward to. That city on a hill that will never stop sparkling, that will never stop shining with the glory of God. Think of the reward that we have. And I want you to think of what we discussed last Sunday, where we talked about a revival going on at Asbury. I don't know how many of you are on Facebook. I don't know how many of you really looked much. But I can say that I went to the NEI page this week, and I saw a message from Reverend Kellerman. Just in case someone doesn't know who Reverend Kellerman is, he's the district superintendent of the NEI district that we are a member of. And he talked about if he was a pastor, what he would want to do when an outbreaking like that happened. So what I'm going to ask is, as the group comes up to get ready and lead music, before we close in song, I'm going to ask everyone that is willing to come up, and this is something that he mentioned. So I'm unashamedly stealing from Reverend Kellerman. And I want everyone that was willing to stand at the altar. And I just want us all to take a few minutes, and I want us to pray. Pray for revival. Pray for God's Spirit to touch this church, this city, this state, this country, and this world. And pray to God, what can we do? Lord, what do you want us to do? What is the next step? Who do you want us to talk to? Who do you want us to pray for? Who do you want us to pray with? So I'm going to go ahead and ask everyone that is willing to please come up to the altars. And then we are going to pray together. And we are going to pray for God's will to be done in this world.